Hey everybody, welcome back to the Contrarians. We have another neat little panel discussion for you today. We're joined by some of our Patreon subscribers, and we got Martin on the panel discussion today as well. Today we're going to be looking at somewhat of a polarizing album, Rocka Rolla by Judas Priest. This is an early album in their discography. There's definitely some different opinions on this album, so this is going to be interesting to go through and see what people think. Just a quick, very, very quick little thing about some ranking statistics about this album. In my research, I've only looked at a few things. I go more in depth in the research when we do our regular episodes. Based on my research, this album generally ranks quite low in all of the ranking lists. So on Ultimate Classic Rock, it ranks at number 11. That was, I think, the highest out of all the lists that I've looked at. On Loudwire, it ranked at number 12. And on Louder Sound, it ranked at number 17, with Demolish being the only album that came before it in that list. Demolition, sorry. Louder Sound says Judas Priest's debut album was more about hinting at their potential than clicking into the higher gear that the band would later use to conquer the world. Rocka Rolla is enjoyable enough with its faint whiff of progressive hard rock and its warm analog tones, but it's a patchy affair and never comes close to the grandeur and the grit of the classics. So Sea of Tranquility had Stained Class at number 1. Rocka Rolla came in at number 12. And Pete says he had grown to appreciate the heaviness of the album over time, listed some of the songs that he liked, and basically compares it to the first Black Sabbath album. So basically you see that it comes in usually, never comes close to the top 10 in the lists that I've seen. I have my own opinions on the album, and we're going to go around and I'm going to ask each person here what they think about the album, if they're for or against it, and what they rank it out of 10. Before we do that quickly, I actually have a video shout out from Mike from Lebrain Train. I was invited on his show, and he basically, there was a scheduling conflict. I couldn't go on his show, so we came up, because we're doing this show, so we came up with this cool little concept where he was going to chime in on Rocka Rolla, and I sent him a video on his show. So he's doing the top 5 Tony Martin albums, solo and Black Sabbath. So if you want to see what my top 5 Tony Martin albums are, go check out his show after you watch ours. And I'm going to share with you what he said about Rocka Rolla, and then we'll go around and get everybody's opinion.
Hey guys, it's Mike Ladano here. Thank you, Marco, for asking me to participate. I'm very honored. Rocka Rolla is an album that I go a long way back with. I first got this copy here at Sam the Record Man in Kitchener in 1989. And it immediately threw me for a loop, because it doesn't sound like the Judas Priest that I was familiar with in 1989. It sounded a lot more bluesy, a lot more jammy. And although that's the way Priest started, I'm not sure that's their niche, you know? Having said that, there's a few tracks here that I loved back then and still love today. One for the Road, Rocka Rolla, and the Cheater portion of the Winter Suite. Never cared particularly for a lot of the stuff on side 2, which was a lot slower, bluesier. Kind of picks up at the end there with Dying to Meet You. But, you know, I think for me, Rocka Rolla, if I was making my Judas Priest mixtape, it would be 3 tracks would make my tape. That's about it. Do love this record, the way it looks, though. I have that version, and of course we have the other cover art here. I call it the football player cover art. And got this here, which has all the tracks from Rocka Rolla remixed. And maybe Martin or somebody knows, why was Rocka Rolla remixed for this Hero in 1981? And finally, my most recent copy of Rocka Rolla is in here. The new 50 Heavy Metal Years of Music box set. Pretty cool. It sounds great, actually. This is the copy from the box set. So, I'd keep One for the Road, Rocka Rolla, Cheater, and that's it. I would Deep Six, Winter, Deep Freeze, Winter Retreat, Never Satisfied, Run of the Mill, Dying to Meet You, and Caviar and Meths. Sorry. If I had to give this a rating on a scale of 10, I'd probably go 4. Thanks for having me, guys. Rocka Rolla.
Thanks, Mike from Lebrain Train, for sending us that little video, and go check out my top 5 Tony Martin albums on his video when he debuts it tonight. All right, so I'm going to go around and ask each of you what you think about the album, rank it out of 10, and then we'll tally up all of our rankings at the end. Why don't we start with Peter?
Thanks, Marco. Well, I have not heard this album before this week, and it was a revelation. Wow. I mean, if they did a reaction YouTube of me listening to this album, my facial expressions would just go, is this Judas Priest? It just does not sound like Judas Priest in any shape or form. To me, it's very stoner sounding. It's like a stoner album. There's a little bit of Pink Floyd. It's a little bit psychedelic. One thing that you compare this album to the later Judas Priest albums is that there's a lot of spatial between the instruments. There's a clear definition between the drums, the bass, and the guitars. I know that John Hinch was the drummer, and I think they fired him because he was inadequate for the band. He's very sort of got crisp drumming, and it serves a lot of the songs well because a lot of the songs are very sort of spatial, slowed down, very riffy. And that sort of drumming, which is kind of very crisp, does serve the soundscape of this album. Ian Hill's bass, where, the later Judas Priest, it's very in a particular Judas Priest bass pattern, is very florid in this album. It's all over the shop, and you hear him very much in the mix. And Rob Halford's vocals are very much, he's singing in a vocal register, which is quite, you don't hear it in the Judas Priest catalog where he's singing in a deeper voice. I think there's one, I think it's Dying to Meet You, Hero, Hero, where I wrote down Scott Walker of the Walker Brothers. I think he was trying to get that really sort of lower vocal register. So, I think it's a really interesting album, but it hints at, their later works, but it doesn't, it's sort of absorbing maybe a lot of the prog elements and a lot of the psychedelic and the stoner elements of that particular era. And if you closed your eyes and listened to it, you'd probably think it's one of those albums that would be on the Vertigo label. And if you looked at the album cover, I mean, put up your hand in this call. If you saw that album cover, would you think it's Judas Priest, the bottle cap?
No.
You wouldn't, would you? It doesn't give any indication in any shape or form of what they were going to, a couple of years later with the leather and the full throttled, motorbikes and the Rob Halford isms. So just going through the tracks very quickly. One for the Road, I said, very subtle guitar work, crisp drumming, very Dave Gilmour type Pink Floyd sounding guitars. Rocka Rolla, I think it's kind of a glammy song. I could imagine in that some of those bands in the, produced by or written by Mike Chapman, like Your Sweet. I think that could be a counterpoint to some of those sort of songs. Winter, I said psychedelic, kind of doomy sounding. Deep Freeze is okay. Winter Retreat, he sings in a lower tone. It sounds a little bit like Breathe off the Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd. Again, I keep on coming back to Pink Floyd. It's just my initial sort of listening to this album. Cheetah is, it's really bluesy, got a nice harmonica riff and great storytelling. Never Satisfied, which I noticed was the lyrics were written by Al Atkins. It's probably my favorite track on the album. It's got a great riff and a nice rolling guitar riff. But again, the drumming is noticeably lighter for this type of music. So I can understand why Glenn Tipton may have pushed John Hinch out of the band and wanted somebody, with a little bit more oomph in the drumming. Run of the Mill, I'm not a big fan. That probably doesn't go anywhere. Dying to Meet You, Hero, Hero, as I said, it's got that Scott Walker sound, or maybe Ronnie James Dio in a frog blender in some of it. And then Caviar and Meths, I think it sort of closes on a little bit of a downer. It doesn't go anywhere. So I think overall I've got a quite a positive reaction to this album. There's a couple of tracks that I'm not really favourable to, but gee whiz, it doesn't sound like a Judas Priest album. And as I said, I've never heard this album before this week, and a fresh pair of ears, and I'm going to give it a 7.
Okay.
7, gotcha.
Well argued. Excellent.
Why don't we go with John next? Take it away, John.
Thanks, Marco. So with me, I go back with this probably sometime after I got Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith. It was probably in my junior high, senior high years. So I got the cover, as Mike alluded to, the football player, but to me that looked like a big pork chop on his back that he was carrying. So that's how I look at that cover. So I had that, and I thought, wow, this is definitely different than Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders, but I grew to really like the album. It was for me though, I've noticed as I was listening to the album again this past week, how little I listened to side 2 past Never Satisfied. So I'm like, I couldn't remember how the rest of the album went. So I started listening to those, and I have come to really like this album even more. I like One for the Road, has that nice chugging blues, good opening album track. Rocka Rolla, of course, the first of many Tipton, Halford, Downing co-writes. Very interesting lyrics, to say the least. The whole winter suite with the KK whammy bar, just noise solo in the middle of all of that, and a little drum solo by John Hinch. And I like Pete. I like Peter. I like the cheater end of it. I think that's a good rockin' chugger at the very end with Rob doing a harmonica. Then you get to Never Satisfied, and it was interesting how they even brought Never Satisfied back on the Epitaph tour. And I can remember Rob Halford saying, okay, I think I need to explain this song a little bit because there's a lot of very blank faces out there. So it would be, he had to explain the song a little bit because nobody knew the song, so that was kind of interesting. I always liked that track though, but yeah, the drumming was pretty light on that. For me, Run of the Mill, when it gets to about that 4-minute mark and they start the guitar solo and they got that, John and Ian are just kind of locked in on that riff groove. Me personally, I dig throbbing, pulsing rhythms like that. I love that kind of stuff. And I was digging it. I was really, really digging that. Like the Halford, almost Child in Time like vocal toward the end of that song. So that's where I felt like there was a little bit of Deep Purple there. Dying to Meet You feels like it's like 2 or 3 songs combined. It starts off really slow and then it just changes tempo and it goes totally different direction. Caviar Meth's just a very somber, quiet 2-minute song, and I'm like, what? I'd love to listen to the 14-minute version that's supposedly out there, and what is that? What did the original song sound like? I listened to Al Atkins did a version of it on an album, Victim of Changes. I think it came out in about 98. And I listened to that earlier and I was like, this doesn't sound anything. There's like no parts of that song really that factored into what Judas Priest put out there. So again, I would love to hear the rest of that song, whoever owns the rights to it, and whether Glenn and KK can ever come back together to say, yeah, let's see what we could do with this. But all in all, I give it a 7. I give it a solid 7. I don't know where I would rank it in the catalog because I really haven't listened to the 2000s era Priest as much. So I really need to catch up on a lot of that. So, but I'd give it a solid 7.
I know that's our friend Howard.
I love this record. 8 or 9 out of 10. I can't figure out. Maybe I'll go 8.5. I love it, and I'll tell you why. Big Priest fan since the early 80s. Probably discovered them around British Steel. And this debut record drew me in big time with that title song, man. It's so catchy. Phenomenally catchy for me. And as a writer, I love the catchiness. I love melodic, catchy songs, and that really worked for me. No, it was metal without much lyrical meaning, but it was fun. And that to me is metal. Fun, you know? You don't need to have lyrical meaning. So I really got into this, but way after the early stuff like Sad Wings and British Class and Hellbent. It was like something that came later because I didn't discover it, because that's what we were fed back in the 80s. And but it still holds up to me today. When I saw the live in the studio recording, oh man, not in the studio. Where were they? Live was the BBC. I saw it on YouTube, playing songs from this album. Forget about it. I was like blown away. To me, Halford is the star of this show, and I always loved his low register. For me, his ballad voice is up there with like a Billy Joel. Just love his ballad voice. He could have been a ballad singer back then and made a living, even though that's very unmetal. Sorry, but I'm a metalhead first, okay? He delivers even the silly lyrics wonderfully to me. The unique passion and the attitude and how he sings these songs, and it creates a breath of imagination that the lyrics aren't really giving us. That's how important he was to me as a lyricist, as a vocalist back then. And KK's writing back then I thought was great, even though it got kind of pushed aside when Glenn came around. He should have been more of a writer than he was. Though I can't complain about their catalog up until the 90s. So that's what I think.
Cool. Very nice. I'll put you down for an 8.5.
Awesome. Thanks, Howard.
Put me down for an 8.5.
Okay.
Why don't I go next, actually? I actually really, really like this album. I'm right with Howard. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. I think it's really cool. Like, it's really mellow, but it's really cool. I do think that, it is heavy. It is a little heavy blues. Like, you see that when you look at some of the reviews and stuff like this, but I love the album. It's very atmospheric, very moody, and it's kind of doomy in some ways. Although it's interesting is I hear some like Deep Purple kind of tones throughout this album in some places. And even especially in the soloing, I hear a little bit of Jimi Hendrix, a little bit of Deep Purple in the soloing. I don't know if that's just me or not, but I think I like every song on this. And that's why I'm giving it such a high rating. It's maybe not typical Judas Priest for somebody who is getting into Judas Priest or knows a lot of their later albums, especially like Painkiller and stuff like this. If you go and listen to something like this, it's not as definitely, there's no thrash on this at all, but I like the album the way it is. I like every song off of it. I think my favorite song is Cheater. I think that's a super cool tune with a lot of attitude. It's got a cool rock hook. I like the wrangling solo. I like the hook on the backing vocals on the chorus. The whole album, start to finish, Never Satisfied. That's one that kind of reminds me of Deep Purple a bit. Run of the Mill is epic. I like the winter freeze. I like that whole thing. I think it kind of maybe suffers a little bit, that one tune, just for me being so long. Like, I know it's 3 tracks, but it's kind of like one track, one tune. And I think it gets a little long in parts, and they kind of do the guitar effects and stuff like this. That for me, I kind of loses me a bit here and there, but most of that, the Winter and Winter Retreat, all of that, most of that track I enjoy. There's just 1 or 2 little things, and that's me being nitpicky. I like the song Rocka Rolla. I think that's a hooky tune. That's kind of like a commercial thing, right? I like the opening track, start to finish. I like this album. I would totally give this an 8 out of 10. I like the driving drums, the guitars, for a first album. And Pete Pardo from Sea of Tranquility compared it to the Black Sabbath's first album, and I totally can see that, especially because of the songs on Black Sabbath, the first Black Sabbath album, that are really long and kind of progressive, but very heavy blues kind of thing. But like for a first album, I find this album is produced very well. I find that the instruments all sound pretty good to me. And I know that this album's been remastered, reissued. There's different covers. There's different, like, so I don't know what version I heard. Like, I'm losing track of that nowadays. But whatever version I heard sounded pretty good to me. And for a first album, and you look at like Kiss's first album, Black Sabbath's first album, you look at some first albums that sound kind of the production. There's some critiques you could have about the production. This one, I'm all about this album. It's not maybe a thrash heavy metal album. To me, I just thought it was mellow, cool. I liked every song. So for me, it's an 8 out of 10. Why don't I go with Ryan next? Take it away, Ryan.
All right, guys. So Rocka Rolla, got that right here. Obviously, this came out in '74. It was produced by Roger Bain, of Black Sabbath, as we've mentioned a few times, and like Budgie fame production-wise. I also do like this album. I have issues with it, but I like it a lot. Like it's I'd say one of my favorite Judas Priest albums. I definitely like it more than most of their 80s onwards output. I think British Steel is a better album from the 80s. But other than that, I like it more than pretty much all their other stuff from that era. I do think it's definitely the worst 70s album, though, for sure. I'm a really big 70s Judas Priest fan. I think that was where they had a lot of their most interesting output. It was very progressive, very complex, heavy in its own right. Not as thrashy as the 80s stuff, but I think the production was a little heavier than what happened on like Screaming for Vengeance and stuff, which is a great album, just not one of my favorites. But so back to this album though. So debut album, 1974, you got Bob Halford on this one, as it says on this one. I think that's the only one that ever said that. And you have Glenn Tipton, KK Downing, John Hinch on the drums, and then Ian Hill. So John Hinch is really the only member of the band that wasn't on anything else after this. I think he did a very good job on this. It kind of reminds me of John Rutsey from the first Rush album. Didn't really fit with the band, but a very good drummer, did a good job on this first album. I think top to bottom, this is a pretty cool album. I love One for the Road and Rocka Rolla. I think they're very catchy tunes. One thing that no one's mentioned yet so far, but I think that when I think of things that I hear as influences of this album, especially on songs like One for the Road, Dying to Meet You, and stuff like that, I kind of hear like an Alice Cooper band kind of vibe. There's some of the riffs, the melodic sound to them that like mix with like psychedelia and stuff, and the way that they could go into softer stuff real quick too. It definitely has Alice Cooper vibes to me, which I think is very interesting. I hear that more than a Black Sabbath influence, honestly, other than like some aspects of the doomier riffs on like Winter and kind of the production because it's a Roger Bain thing. But yeah, so I love the first two songs. I think the Winter Suite's pretty cool. I especially like the heavier riff and like the first song Winter and stuff. I think that's a really cool sounding riff. It's very unique and stuff. Cheater's cool. I think the lyrics are a little cringy on it, honestly, but it's still a very rocking and awesome song. Side 2 is actually really where this album shines for me, though, even though I really do like side 1 a lot. I think Never Satisfied's an awesome heavy song. Like I said, that one kind of has a little bit of an Alice Cooper vibe to me. Run of the Mill is really cool. I like how it's kind of slower, but it's also heavy at the same time. And I think it's where we get our first really great Bob Halford vocal performance. He had some of those higher registers in that one. I like the vibes of the song. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like some of like Phenomenon, UFO, or some of their more space rocky stuff when it's slower, um, which is cool. Dying to Meet You is a really neat, heavier song. Um, I like everything about that one. I like the lyrics a lot. I was reading them as I was listening to the song in recent times. It seems like kind of like an anti-war type of song, really kind of blatant in the lyrics. They might be a little heavy-handed, but I still like them a lot. And Caviar Mets is a cool song too. I mean, it's not the most memorable on here, but I like it. Um, so when I try to rank this album and Judas Priest catalog, and when I try to come up with a rating, it's tricky for me because I personally really like the album, but I also hear kind of like that they were not a fully developed band at this point. I mean, they've been going for about 5 years, so it's better than a lot of debuts end up being. Like it's a very, very good debut, but there is some moments of the songwriting where you could tell it's a little weak, like, oh, the riff goes up a whole step and they do it again a few times, like those kind of hokey little moves. And some, I don't know, some of it just feels a little forced, a little bit too much of the times. Like they were just kind of hooking on to certain trends and stuff. But overall, I think it's a very good album. I'd say, like I said, I like it more than most of their 80s onward content. I like pretty much every Judas Priest album. I'm not like a huge fan of Ram It Down, not a huge fan of Nostradamus, but other than that, I like all their stuff consistently. I like their stuff in the later 2000s. I even kind of like the stuff with Tim Ripper. I think Jugulator is a good album. Demolition's okay. I mean, it's not their best, but it's still a pretty good album. So they're probably my favorite metal band. Them, Iron Maiden, Slayer, Black Sabbath. That's like kind of my favorite metal bands of all time. So when I look at this one, I would probably give it a 7.5 or 8. It's not their best album, but it's very good. I mean, that's me giving an album like Sad Wings of Destiny a 10 out of 10 because I think that's an absolutely perfect album. In my opinion, it's that and maybe Sin After Sinner, the only perfect albums they've ever made. I think every other album Judas Priest has ever made, they had one song that kind of ruined it. As much as I love the albums, there's always that one song. So, I mean, this one, Rocka Rolla, I don't have a song like that really like kills the vibe. So, I mean, that definitely ranks it up higher than some others. I mean, I still like albums like Hellbent for Leather more, even though it has like Take on the World, which I think is a terrible song, or British Steel, which has Red, White, and Blue, which is an awful song. I still think those are probably better albums overall, but yeah, I'd say a 7.5 for 8. I'll go 8 today with this album because I do really like it.
All right. Put you down for an 8. Cool.
Ryan, what about Turbo?
Turbo? It's good.
Yeah, you like that? Okay.
I do like it. It's a very enjoyable album. I mean, it's heavy in its own right, like with an 80s production. Not as good as this, not as good as any of the 70s stuff, but it's a good album.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Why don't we go with Pontus next?
Hello there.
Hi there.
My take on this album was that it brought me back many memories of going to record shops in the 80s and going through the bins and seeing that cover. Because that was, just as we talked about Never Say Die on another episode, we also talked about the fact that you were taught, you saw that this album was a low price album, so you avoided it in a way because you assumed it wasn't good and you were nearly told it wasn't good. My introduction to Judas Priest was Killing Machine, and I've grown to like the 70s stuff more. And very recently, I listened to this album. I was introduced to it. I think it's a great album. It's produced by Roger Bain, and they were in Trident Studios, so they were, this is not a lesser debut in a sense that they didn't get any cred for producing it, but to me, it sounds like a Budgie album. Very much so, because Roger Bain was producing Budgie at the time, and it's actually the same guitars. He has the same guitars he found out about Sabbath. He produced the first 3 Sabbath albums and got it right on Paranoid, and it's that dry sound which I like a lot. I like the dry sound, but it's one of those things like, when we went backwards and found out about 70s records when we lived in the 80s, right? We wanted dry sound because we were, drenched in all these reverb things back then. My take on it is that it's one of those albums that, we had all these groups, like Deep Purple took 3 albums, almost 4 albums to get it right. Yes, had 2 albums before they got it right. And Judas Priest managed to get it together on the second album. They found their focus. Just like Elton John had, actually, one album, which is not very well known, which is called Empty Sky. He made an album. And in the 1970s, he makes Elton John, and everything falls into place. And that's the same with Rocka Rolla here. I don't think we ever hear harmonic again on the Judas Priest album. We hear it twice, and there's a lot of synths here, played by Tipton. My favorite tracks, I love Run on the Mill. I'm a huge sort of jammy guy. I like that sort of thing. I think that Rocka Rolla reminds me a bit of Bachman Turner Overdrive, in a sense. I think that One Fun Road is great. I think the Winter Suite is flawed, but it has its moments, especially the rocking part of it, where, they rock out. The riffs are here, but the dueling guitars are not here. The riffs are here, actually. It's slower, but it's very sort of, they know how to rock out. The most Judas-sounding song on the album is Dying to Meet You, when it comes into that hero bit. Here we can hear that what is coming in the vocal melody. I think that Halford shines on this record. He's the star. Here's a guy that really can sing. We can hear that from the beginning. And he will develop to a very, very good singer, right up there with all the, 80s good singers like, Dio and Dickinson and himself. It's just, they were in another scope in 1974. And they were given this sort of 70s vibe to it. And I think that Roger Bain wanted them to sound like something like Budgie or something like that. It's only a very 70s hard rock thing. One can say that lots of the material for Sad Wings for the second album was written. Tyrant was written. And I also think that the title track was written. So it was in the bag, but it wasn't really finished. And he had denied them, the right to use them. So then later went to Sad Wings for Destiny. That was, but it's a major leap between the 2 records, of course. They really find their focus. And it's great that they did, but it's not a bad record in any sense. I would say a 7, because it has that groove.
Yep.
To it.
Yep. Excellent.
Nice. Good job.
Very nice. Good stuff.
All right. I'm going to throw it over to Christian. Why don't you let us know what you thought about the album?
All right. So I guess let me start by saying this is actually the first Judas Priest album I listened to. Along with Iron Maiden, my intention was to go with their discographies in order, kind of side by side. But after listening to this album, and then on the other side of things, like listening to the very beginning of Prowler on Iron Maiden's debut, like, you know, I basically didn't touch Priest for a while, and I just went on with Iron Maiden. And so that kind of just put me off of Priest for a while. Obviously, it's not exactly fair to compare the two. Those are just the circumstances I was in listening to them. I don't hate this album. In fact, I actually kind of enjoy it. However, like, there's nothing particularly remarkable about the album, I would say. And I think pretty much all that has to do with, you know, what was going on in the studio. Like we've said, Roger Bain's on production, did work with Sabbath and Budgie. And in my opinion, he pretty much ruined the album. Like Pontus said, the song Tyrant was already written at the time, but it got rejected. Epitaph was also written, and Ripper was also written. But they were all rejected because they weren't commercial enough. Whiskey Woman, which is basically the workshop version of Victim of Changes, also got rejected. And so really, Tyrant, for instance, is probably my favorite Priest song. And so we would see all those songs on the next album, which is great because that became my favorite Priest album, Sad Wings. But as all right, Whiskey Woman obviously would become Victim of Changes, and all those songs would be on Sad Wings of Destiny, which become my favorite Priest album, which is good. But as for the songs that were deemed commercial enough to be on the album, to me, they're just not that great. One thing to note is that pretty much every song on this album is very slow. It's just plotting the entire way through, which to me gets boring. And not only that, but Halford sounds completely monotonous 95% of the time. Obviously, you have a few exceptions, like, you know, parts in One of the Mill, and then I would say Hero 2. But to me, it just sounds like New York Priest. The songs have potential. I think if they were sped up and had heavier production, I think it'd be a much better record. Glenn Tipton joined the band kind of during the early stages of recording, and obviously there were remnants of Al Atkins on the album, and so it kind of wasn't the band Judas Priest, really. I think the two most promising songs are Run of the Mill and Hero Hero, which comes in at the end of Dying to Meet You. Run of the Mill has some really heavy elements, good vocal performance, obviously, and Hero Hero, like somebody said, it sounds like Priest. It's got that Halford swagger in the vocal melodies, which kind of sounds like you know, something you'd hear with Genocide on Sad Wings. Love the title track. Not exactly Priest-esque, but I was super happy to see them play that live recently, which is really cool that they're going back to this album. But overall, I'm happy the way the album actually turned out because it made for a really amazing sophomore album. But obviously it had more potential. And to me, this definitely ranks lower in the discography. But so I would probably give it probably a 4.5, honestly. But what I found weird is, like, I went on Metal Archives earlier today, and you'd have people give this album like 90% or 90. Someone even gave it 98%. And to me, that just makes me think, you know, if you have an album like this at 90%, and you say Sad Wings, to me, it's a perfect album. I give it 100%. You know, that's a very small amount of space for the rest of their albums that I would say in between. I mean, you have, you know, obviously Stained Class and Sin After Sin and British Steel and Scream for Vengeance that I would say are obviously up there as well. So that just kind of, I think people are just really generous to Priest as a band, which makes sense because obviously they're a great band. But anyway, this just doesn't rank that high, but it's an enjoyable listen. So 4.5.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Christian.
All right.
And
Not generous at all, man. Not generous at all. It is what it is. And Atkins had hardly anything to do with this album. He kind of helped out with some lyrics, and that's about all he did.
Yeah, true.
It's a great record, man. Sorry he felt like that.
To me, it's I remember liking it a lot more, but listening to it again today, maybe it was a bad day, but
hey, each their all. I just wanted to give you the facts. That's all.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to throw it over to Martin. Last but not least, take it away, Martin.
Okay, so my experience with this album is one of my fondest rock and roll memories of all time. I got Sad Wings of Destiny as a new release, and it blew our minds. It was like the greatest heavy metal album. It made almost everything else obsolete when that came out. And then I don't know how I got this, but I had one of those little, stoner bootleg rare record stapled together, courier type mail order things, right? And I spotted this little line listing there: Judas Priest Rocka Rolla, Gull, 1974. I'm going, what? There's another one, and I'm thinking 74. That's a long time before 76. When you're a kid, I was 13 at the time, right? And then Rocka Rolla, that doesn't sound like the same band, but I thought, I'm going to order this thing. I can't believe this must be another Judas Priest album. So the greatest memory in all rock and roll for me is just waiting and anticipating that postman to turn up with that package. And he eventually did. And there it was, in a standard record mailer, I had Judas Priest Rocka Rolla. So this is before Sin After Sin comes out. And, I don't remember particularly my memories at the time. It doesn't really matter. But the point is now, I think this is a record that, who mentioned this? Budgie. Pontus, you mentioned Budgie, right? In terms of this sounding like a Budgie album. To me, this sounds a lot like the Budgie album from 1974, which is In for the Kill. It also sounds like Budgie Squawk. Not so much like Never Turn Your Back on a Friend. A little bit like Budgie from 71. A little bit of Volume 4 or Vol 4. I'm correcting myself. It's Vol 4 and Black Sabbath 1 and a little bit of Paranoid. So yeah, that Roger Bain thing comes through. The band themselves were crestfallen when they heard this, and they hated the production. They did not like this album, and I don't quite understand why. I think the production is perfectly fine for a debut album in 1974 from a band with no money on a label with no money. I think it sounds great. There's no problem with the production. I frankly don't think the production on Sad Wings is a whole heck of a lot better than this production. The songs are better. I've always said a short version of this album describing it as it sounds like the demos and the B-sides, the demos and B-sides of Sad Wings. And you hear that. I think you hear a direct comparison with Cheater, with things like Deceiver or Dreamers, whichever the heavy one is, Deceiver. And you hear a little bit of maybe Victim of Changes. You hear, a little bit of Never Say Die in Victim of Changes. So you get the and what else would I say? I guess mainly those ones. Rocka Rolla, certainly there's no comparison in there. I love the BTO comparison with that. That's kind of cool because it has that little pulled back, non-aggressive Randy Bachman sort of guitar line to it, right?
Yeah, and it has a rhythm.
Yeah, and exactly, and the kind of but no, the band really didn't like the production. They didn't like the album very much. But I maintain that if Judas Priest would have put this album out and then never did anything else for the rest of their lives, we'd all be talking about this album about on legendary par with your Sir Lord Baltimore's and your Bangs and your Captain Beyond debut and your Granicus and your May Blitz and all that stuff. We'd basically be saying it's a great heavy metal classic from the 70s, a lost gem, right? Because it is that heavy. It's pretty darn heavy for one of these old records. So I have no problem with this album at all. I've always liked it. Like I say, I think the production's fine. I think most of the lyrics are pretty cool. I think Rob Halford does a good job. I think everybody does a pretty good job. It is proggy. It is a little weird in that. I like the Child in Time comparison. Was that you, John, that mentioned Child in Time? Yeah, it's right in my notes. Child in Time for that one. It's that's pretty wild. But no, I think it's a pretty good album. No problem with it at all. I'm gonna go 7 out of 10 on it.
Nice. So I actually have a average calculator, and out of all of our scores, on average, we give it a 6.7, 6.72.
Perfectly fair.
That's our average Contrarians panel score for this album, 6.72. A lot of sevens across the board, actually, mostly sevens.
Yep.
Do you know how much this sold back in the day?
I really don't know that. That's a really good question, because you do have the problem with the big, acrimonious break between the Gull guys, and then when they go over to CBS, they get signed in London, right out of CBS London. So they've fought those guys tooth and nail all over the years. You had the reissues. They never liked seeing those reissues come out. They've always tried to buy the rights back to Sad Wings and Rocka Rolla, and they were never kind of able to do that. It's surprising they got them into the box set, even because, there's always been this big break between it. But no, I don't think it sold very much, because nothing they did sold very much all the way up until starting with kind of a little bit of Hellbent and a little bit of the live album, and then bigger with British Steel, which, as KK says, frankly, they never had the huge albums, and that really bothered him. They don't have the 3 and the 4 and the 5 times platinum albums. They've got a few golds and platinums in there, but they've never done that well. But it's probably a mystery that we'll never know. But if I was to make an educated guess, as educated as I could on this, I would say Rocka Rolla over the years, let's say America, just say America to start with, I would say it's probably in the 200,000 range is what I would pick. Maybe worldwide, 450, that kind of thing.
According to Wikipedia, and we all know how accurate Wikipedia is, according to their discography section, Rocka Rolla did not chart anywhere and has no certifications. It's actually the only album listed in their studio albums that did not chart anywhere.
Yeah.
Because even the next one,
this no certifications thing, I swear to God, I mean, this probably feels to me like the vibe of one of those situations where, the Gull guys, David Hemmings and whatever, I almost feel like they wouldn't go get it certified, because they'd rather, not kind of reveal how many sales are out there. So there's all this politics around getting albums certified, but I don't think it would certify in the States anyways. It might have gone gold in some odd territory somewhere for your 10,000s or your 20,000s or something. But no, I don't think it really deserves certifying. But no, yeah, it's fine. So good job, guys. That was really cool.
What do you think was the big leap? Was it Tipton's writing? Was it they played more together? They got their thing together. They sped up things.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's not a lot of time to play more. I mean, I think the big leap, part of it is the leap that we don't see from being a band from 1969 all the way to 1974. So there's a lot of experience of these guys getting their chops together, and that's why it's a pretty accomplished album. But no, yeah, I mean, good point, Pontus. I mean, this story about Tyrant and Epitaph and Ripper and all that being ready means I think Tipton definitely has a lot to do with the big leap.
Nice. I agree.
This was definitely cool. I do. Sorry, go ahead, John, real quick.
I was just going to say, I just had a question. We know this album's been reissued a number of different times. I think my original version, like I said, the football player with the pork chop, actually also had Diamonds and Rust on it.
Yes, that was a bonus track.
Yeah. So how many people have that version? With a song like, with that extra song thrown in there. And
yeah, it's pretty interesting. They were thinking of covering that long ago. It's not 74. I don't think. I think they made that in 75, possibly. Right in between, something like that. Yeah.
All right, that was really cool. I do want to wrap up, but I know a few gentlemen that are joining us today have their own channels and stuff. I forgot to let everybody plug their stuff. I'm just going to go around real quick. Let me know what you're working on or what your channel is, and throw the plug out. Why don't we start with Martin? Do you have any books coming out or anything you want to talk about?
Not particularly. Just martinpopoff.com for any of the books. Of course, people know out there that I do have, the updated, best written version of my Judas Priest story. So that's 2 books. Judas Priest Decade of Domination, which goes 74 to 84, and then Turbo Till Now, which is the next album. what are we talking there? 74, 84. So that's Turbo, of course, until right up to the latest album. So 2 Judas Priest books. I still do have them both in stock, and there they are. martinpopoff.com.
Nice. Christian, do you have anything you want to plug or anybody you want to say hi to?
No, I don't have anything. I tried to start a YouTube channel once, but that never worked out. But my Instagram is Christian Call02. That's Christian COLL02. That's all I got.
Nice. Howard, how about you? Anything to plug or anybody you want to say hi to? Anyone special?
Hey guys. Well, just go to howardherrick.com. I write metal songs. I write indie songs. I write pop songs. I write everything.
Cool.
Excellent.
Want to check it out? Yeah, check it out. I'm in the middle of a new wave record, a progressive metal record, a progressive rock record, and another Led Zeppelin heavy metal record, all coming out soon.
Nice.
I don't advertise myself a lot, so you guys are pretty much the only ones who are hearing this stuff right now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah. If you want to check me out.
Thanks, Howard. Pontus,
Thank you.
Do you have anything to plug, Pontus, or anybody wants to say hi to?
No, but I'm thinking of starting a YouTube channel since Reed said I had the best surname, heavy metal name ever. Yeah. So maybe that will happen.
Do it.
Let us know when you do. Ryan, how about you? I know you got a show, Ryan.
Yeah, so I do have a YouTube channel, Ryan's Final Destination. I post on there occasionally. I mean, recently I've been doing a lot more written reviews too on the Instagram version of that. So that's also Ryan's Final Destination. I've just been switching it up, kind of enjoying doing written stuff recently, but definitely check both out. Got a ton of content on the YouTube channel and a ton of stuff on that Instagram also.
Nice. Thanks, cool. Ryan. Peter, how about yourself?
Yeah, I've got a new channel called Rock Daydream Nation, so please check it out. I've just recently done a ranking top 3 Rose Tattoo, and that's going pretty well. Also dropping a show in a couple of days' time with Tim Derling, who's known to everyone on Contrarians, Tim's Vinyl Connection. So doing ranking the top 5 Whitesnake songs. So that was a lot of fun. Recorded that this morning, and that'll be coming out in a couple of days. So check out the channel and subscribe.
Cool. And how about yourself, John?
Well, I did name my channel my music corner, so I do have that going on. My little music corner of the world, I guess. I don't have much content on it. I put a video out on Warlord, and it's been 7-8 months, and I can't believe I almost have 600 views of the thing. So that's kind of amazing to me. I've got a couple other little things, but nothing. I just don't have the time because life kind of gets in the way a little bit, so I don't get to do a lot of that kind of stuff. But I do have an old classmate friend of mine that I've known since kindergarten. I know her name's Colleen, and she's a big Judas Priest fan. When I told her I was doing this, she's like, "Oh, I can't wait to see it! I can't wait to see it!" So she'll be excited. I gave her a shout out on this, but cool. Yeah,
very cool. Pontus and Christian, we got to get you a channel going. Maybe you can partner up. I'm going to put everybody's links in the description. So anybody who's here has anything to plug, I'm going to put their stuff in the description if you want to check them out. We also have our own channel. Like and subscribe to Contrarians. Thanks to Mike from Lebrain Train. Go check out his top 5 Tony Martin albums. I'm going to do a little guest spot there. And other than that, if you want to join these discussions, join us over at Patreon at any tier, and you can join these discussions and have a chat with us. So thanks everybody for showing up today. 6.73 is what we rated Judas Priest Rocka Rolla, and we'll see you all next time.
Okay. All right. Talk to you later.